Alright, so light behind me. That might not be super awesome for the video. I don't know. I do this one and then I watch it and maybe you see it or you see another one. So I got a request for turbos because turbos is really fun. But there are a lot of numbers and letters and shit like that. So you don't really know what you're looking at. And I think I will give it a go and explaining turbo sizings more or less. And you know, generally a small number is a small turbo. Like a Garrett GT15 is smaller than a GT30, and a Borg S200 is smaller than S300, and a TD04 Mitsubishi turbo is smaller than a TD05. So that's generally the norm. A smaller number is a smaller turbo. But, and you know, these videos, I don't really know, but we tend to get these buts every time. There are different sizes on the same size. That's confusing. But let's say you have a Garrett turbo and you have a GTX. Let's say you have a GTX 28, and that one you can buy as a GTX 2860 or a 63 or a 67 or even a 71. So it's GTX 2871R or GTX 2860R. So it's a lot of numbers, and then on top of those numbers you have to choose your turbine housing, the exhaust side of the turbo, and that comes with an AR sizing or a centimeter sizing, and that's also really confusing, and it will be a little bit more confusing in a while when I try to explain this. I will not say explain it because maybe I don't explain it, but I try to explain it. So mainly we're going to talk about the turbine side today, because the compressor side, the cold side of the turbo, the side where you have your air filter and the outlet for your intercooler and engine, that side of the turbo is easier for you to pick the correct one. You can go to Holset or Garrett or Borg-Warner's website and they say this turbo is good for 200 to 350 horsepower, and you can choose from your power rating more or less. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and normally it's experience that tend to choose the turbo. If you put turbos on 100 engines, you know pretty much what cold side you need, and pretty much what hot side you need also, but hot side is more complicated for you to understand. So that's why we're going to talk about that today. Let's see if we're going to talk numbers first. It's pretty complicated with the numbers on the cold side, on the compressor side, because like a Garrett, let's say it's a GTX 2860. That means that the compressor side is like shaped like this. So the air filter is in the small end, and inside the compressor housing, the compressor wheel are bigger. So the inducer of the compressor, the inlet of the compressor, is one size, and the exducer, the piece inside the compressor that actually pushes air out, exducer, that is bigger, and that's 60 millimeters on a 2860. It's 63 on a 2863, 67 on a 2867, and 71 millimeters on a GTX 2871R. So Garrett always states the largest size of their compressor wheel. And you can see people online that they say, I put dual 91 millimeter turbos on my Chevy Nova drag car, and I'm pushing 2,500 horsepower. How can you do that on a 91 millimeter turbo? Yeah, that's because everybody that speaks about turbos in millimeters, they speak about the small end of the compressor. And that's where Garrett is making it a little bit complicated, because you and I think that a 67 is 67 millimeters, but it's on the big side. But for us it doesn't matter. But you have to think about it when you read the drag magazines or whatever, that they are talking about the small end of the compressor and not the big end. I think that's all for the numbers on the cold side, and let's focus on the hot side, because the hot side is really fucking complicated. So we have a lot of turbos that has AR numbers and a lot of turbos that are in centimeters. Hull set are in centimeters. You have a turbine housing number 8. That's 8 cubic centimeters. And you know, there are, let's just talk about the normal numbers. Like you have a hull set HX35, and that comes normally with a number 12 turbine housing. And number 12 turbine housing is approximately the same as a 089 AR. So it's a very big turbine housing. And that's why people often tend to change their turbine housing after driving a while. You know, and you can see these posts not only on the diesel forums, but on all car related forums, that people drive their car for 6 months or a year, and then they swap to a number 10 housing or something like that. And the number 10 housing on a hull set or any cubic centimeter valued turbine housing, the number 10 is a AR73, 0.73, give or take. And that's a good size. You know, for Garrett, we normally talk about 63, 64 turbine housings. And that's smaller, but we're gonna make it more complicated. So let's just, you know, you can listen to this video 5 times and you can write the shit down. And number 8 housing, all right? It's like 0.55-ish, something like that, you know? The 10 is 0.73, 70, 75, doesn't really matter. And the 12 is 0.89, and then it just gets bigger. So that's the numbers you can think about when you're choosing a turbine housing for your hull set. But now we're going to make it complicated, because the AR, or the cubic centimeters, or whatever the fuck we're going to call it, but let's say AR because that's the standard in the business. It's calculated in a very fucking weird way. It's like the area of your discharge on your compressor divided by the radius from the center of this area to the center of your fucking turbine wheel. It's like, puta mierda. It's just shit. So it's complicated, but it works. It's a measurement that works and we can use. We don't have to calculate it. But, and that's the thing, an AR is not only an AR. You can have a GTX 28. It's a small turbo, it's a very, very small turbo, and you maxes this out at 400 horsepower. And you have a 63, 64 turbine housing on this one, and it performs perfect. So how can you have a 63-64 turbine housing on a GTX 3076 and do 600 horsepower? It's 50% more with the same AR turbine housing. Yeah, and this is what confuses people, I think, that we are not using larger numbers, because a bigger turbine wheel will flow more exhaust gases regardless of the AR in the turbine housing. So in some applications you have a smaller AR number on your turbo than you have on a small turbo, and you're pushing a lot more power. So it's confusing, but I actually have prepared a little list because I can't remember everything. So I have a list on the side of the phone here, and it's the GTX 28, GTX 30, the Holset HX30 and 35, the BorgWarner S200 and the BorgWarner S300, because this is turbos that we use on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about us as in me. It's us, everybody that watches this. This is the turbos we go to every fucking day. So, the turbine wheel. The turbine wheel is a little bit different from the compressor wheel, because the exhaust gases comes in at the big end and goes out at the small end. And you remember the compressor? It's smaller in where the air filter is, and then it becomes bigger. So it's in reverse. The GTX 28 is 54 millimeter in, and the inducer of the compressor is where the exhaust gases goes into the turbo. Alright, so in and out. Let's say in and out instead of inducer and exducer. In and out is 54 millimeters in, 47 millimeter out. It's a small turbo. It's a small turbo. The GTX 30 is 60 millimeters in, is 6 millimeters larger in, and 55 millimeters out, and that is 8 millimeters larger out. So the turbine wheel of the GTX 30 is a lot bigger than the GTX 28. And there we can get away with the same turbine housing. So this is, I mean, I hope you really can get this, but I understand that it's really fucking complicated, but let's go on with the list. The HX30 is 65 in and 52 out. So compare that to the GTX 30. The GTX 30 is a 600 horsepower turbo. It's a really, really good size turbo. But the HX30 is 5 millimeters larger in on the turbine wheel. It's smaller out. It's 52 and the GTX 30 is 55, so it's 3 millimeters smaller out. But you know, when we're talking turbine housings and we have our HX30, and I don't know what they come in, the 6 centimeter housing, that's AR41, so that's very small. And I mean 9 centimeters, 8-9 centimeters is a really good size turbine housing on an HX30 based on the turbine wheel size and the AR measurements converted to centimeters. Now I don't really know in my head how big the HX30 is on the compressor side, but the turbine side is very good sized, so maybe it's worth it to put a decent sized billet compressor wheel in it. I mean, that's an option. HX35, 35, 70 millimeters in and 60 out. So it's 5 millimeter larger out than the GTX 30, and it's 10 millimeters larger in than the GTX 30. And an HX35 is not like the big power turbo go-to option, but it's really big on the compressor side. And even though it's so big, people run the number 12 turbine housing, AR89. So if your car has an HX35 and is a little bit sluggish, now you know why. You know, it's really big, and I mean, that's the same, you know, it's so big on the turbine side, and the turbine housing 8 or 9 is, no, I mean, it really doesn't matter. It's a good size for this turbo. So, and this, I think this is really interesting because I have never spec'd these turbos with turbine size before. So I just did a list in the order I thought they were, and they were actually in that order, so that's pretty funny. BorgWarner S200, also 70 millimeters out. Yes, that's a HX35, and the BorgWarner S200 is a really, really good fucking turbo. And if you buy the big one, I don't really know the number now, they are 252 and 2, I don't know, I don't remember. But it's, you know, if you choose the big size, the biggest size BorgWarner S200, it's a really, really good turbo. So it's 70 millimeters in and 62 out. So it's the same size as the HX35 in, 2 millimeters larger out. So that little motherfucker can swallow a lot of exhaust gases. BorgWarner S300, 80 millimeters in and 73 out. It's incredibly big. And for the S300s we have actually used an S200 turbine housing, because there are no turbine housing small enough in the S300 lineup to actually work on the diesel on the diesel engines we tend to use. But it's a good turbo, it performs really good, and you know, when you got wheel spin at 200 miles per hour now, 200 kilometers per hour, you know, you are pretty amazed about the turbo. So it's really complicated, I know that. We are gonna go on to 20 minutes for this video, and we have just scraped a little bit on the surface. But you have to think about this. How big is your hot side? Is the turbine wheel this big? You need a small AR number, because you will get all the exhaust gases through there anyway. And you know, all rules are meant to be bent, and there are exceptions to everything. Hull sets, for example, is an exception. They flow really good and they spool really good. So even that they are big, they work. Can you make it better? Yes, you can. With a little bit of knowledge, it can be even better. But, you know, shit works as they are. We just need to think a little bit to tweak it so we like it. And that's all for today. I think we covered the turbo hot side, and I hope the light in the background is okay, because I don't want to do this video again. See you in 3 days.